Welcome to Lumen Industries, my friend. I wonder, do you think Lumen is a publicly traded company?
There is a company, I think it's called Lumen, not Lumon, right? So
Yeah.
there's a slight, difference in terms of the spelling. But yeah, happy to be part of this state-of-the-art technology farm, right? Oh, biotechnology farm, not a technology farm, right? Biotechnology
Yeah.
farm. So yeah, happy to be here.
It probably gets a conglomerate discount, but I bet it's pretty profitable. Thank you for joining me in this fun episode where we discuss Severance, an Apple TV show that kind of feels like an HBO show, but it's on Apple TV Plus. I think we both found it very interesting. So I was thinking we could at first give a little spoiler-free overview of why we liked it, like trying to convince the listener who hasn't watched it yet why they should check it out. And then we'll have the spoiler horn. And then after that, we're going to discuss all of the spoilers. So if you haven't seen the show, don't go past the spoiler horn. So do you want to start? Like, how did you discover the show? Like, who convinced you to watch it? I don't know. And then why do you like it? Why do you think others should watch it?
Yeah, I probably need to start from probably a few months back. I don't remember who was the first person who told me or who influenced me to watch this. But my wife and I, so first of all, we actually don't have Netflix subscription right now. We didn't have any subscription to any of the streaming companies. One of the reasons is I am a sucker for thriller. And I lose all my productivity. I just completely get drawn to it and spend my whole day watching a good thriller. So I'm very, very, very selective before deciding to go for a show. So, it's funny because I feel like different people have different sorts of challenges. So my wife tends to uninstall Instagram or Facebook once in a while because she feels like, she spends too much time there. And I feel like I'm pretty good at managing my social media time, even though I'm kind of a bit of a power user on Twitter, but I think I'm reasonably good at it. But I think I'm pretty bad at managing my time and productivity when I find a very good thriller. So even that's true for, I'll probably explain it later, that it came to fruition even for Severance. So I don't exactly remember who was the first person who kind of influenced me. So my wife and I, we usually watch TV when we are having dinner or lunch together. So we're just talking to ourselves we haven't really watched any TV at all lately. The problem that I described about my own behavior or lack of productivity is more acute when I'm alone. If I'm watching with my wife, it's
Right.
much more manageable because obviously I need to watch it with her and she's pretty good at it. She's pretty good at maintaining just one episode per day. So she has a lot more control and restraints, even if it's a thriller, even if it's the episode ends at with a cliffhanger. Right?
Oh, yeah. You shouldn't start watching Heroes season 1. That one is impossible to stop at one episode, but...
Right. And that's why, even if it's a great, great show, I try not to start something that has 7, 8 seasons. Then I'll just completely lose it. I'll lose my whole week or maybe weeks. Who knows, right? So anyway, so I first noticed Severance is just so far, it's just a one season, right? I think I saw maybe some tweets, maybe by you, maybe by someone else. I don't know exactly who influenced me, and we decided to kind of give it a shot a few months back actually, and then I think we watched for first 10 minutes, and literally nothing happened. Just one person is just walking, and and I'm okay, what is this? I don't have time for this. And we just moved on. We just, started talking to each other and we could shut down the show. And yeah, basically we never really got back to it until very recently. I think you watched Severance. This time I remember who influenced me. I think you watched Severance and you kept writing about it on your newsletter on Twitter. And then one of our other common friend, MI Capital, who's no longer active on Twitter, but that's the name he used to write on Twitter with. And so he also mentioned I was talking to him over the phone and he mentioned Severance is pretty good. I really like it. And I was okay, I'll give it another shot. Liberty is saying it, MI Capital is saying it, and I haven't really watched TV for a while. So I was okay, I'll give it a shot. And I was initially planning to actually watch it at the end of December. Holidays are going on. I don't necessarily have to be very productive. But after publishing one deep dive last month, I had like, I was like, okay, I want to take this day off. Like
It was your reward, right?
Yeah,
Reward
I just
for
want to
work
take
well
one
done.
day off. Like, I just want to chill for this day. And like, okay, what do I do? Like, okay, I'll just watch, this Severance thing, like for the first episode, and I'll watch the rest in late December, right? So I watched the first episode, and there was a quote I want to mention, which really kind of, hooked me. The good news is hell is just a product of morbid human imagination. The bad news is whatever humans can imagine, they can usually create. Right? That was a pretty compelling quote.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And again, like, after I finished the first episode, I realized this is the kind of thriller that kind of hooks me, and I literally finished the whole first season in like within a day. On that day, the day I kind of took a day off, I basically just sat around the whole day, watched the whole thing at a stretch. So I it was also a reminder I need to continue to be very thoughtful before starting a new show.
There was nice foreshadowing there. Like, I wanted to watch just one episode. The best plans, right? On my side, I don't quite remember where I first heard about it, but a lot of people whose opinion I generally respect about like taste all started watching that show at the same time, like, I don't know, 6 months ago or something. I think probably like John Gruber and mentioned it and a bunch of others. And a lot of them were like, I watched it all, and then immediately afterwards I rewatched it. And like, okay, that's powerful, right? If it's good enough for that, right?
Yeah.
So it was always kind of on my list, but I was rewatching Mad Men with my wife, and we were always in other things, right? But when that was over, Severance was top of the list, so I gave it a try. And the way I would describe it without spoilers is it's like one of those good old from the 50s like science fiction short stories or novels where you take a few really interesting ideas and then you build a world around them and try to kind of take them to their logical conclusions. So Severance is kind of based on one of these things, right? The idea that you could sever someone's memory where when they're at work, they don't remember their life outside of work, and when they're outside, they don't remember what's at work, right? So it's kind of like a sci-fi thing in that way, but it's not sci-fi like with spaceships and high technology, right? It's mostly the modern world, but everything is like mixed, right? There's some, like old cars and tech, but newer things. And anyway, the other aspect I really like is the visuals are very, very good. I've always liked directors like Denis Villeneuve or Wes Anderson or the Coen brothers or all these guys that give a lot of attention to the visuals, to like the color teams, the symmetry of things. It's a very beautiful show. And another thing that came to mind while watching it was there's a science fiction writer called Philip K. Dick. A bunch of his stuff has been made into movies, right? So Blade Runner is based on one of his novels. Minority Report is another one.
Yep.
And most of his stuff has a kind of like, what is reality, right? What's the nature of reality? What's a person, right? Is it our perception, our memories? Or when that stuff can kind of get weird, like Total Recall is another Philip K. Dick story, right? And I feel like Severance, I don't think it's based on the Philip K. Dick story, but it feels kind of like in that vein. So that's kind of catnip to me.
Yeah.
I think we can do the spoiler horn now and get into the into the detail. Yeah. So anyone who hasn't seen it, I recommend like pause the podcast, put it aside, watch the show, and then come back, because it's not the kind of show that you want to have spoiled, right? It's worth watching fresh.
Yep.
So let's ring the horn. All right.
Here you go.
On the other side.
Right.
Do you want to start or should I?
No, go for it. I mean, I don't know where exactly you want to start, so I'll give you the opportunity to kind of drive the conversation.
All right. So the first thing I noticed about it is that the lumen severed floor is kind of like purgatory, right? People really are stuck there against their will, right? Life to them is nothing but work all of the time, surrounded by all of the same people, and like half of those people are people who have control over them, like absolute control basically. They have information and they have all kinds of punishment that they can give, right? It really seems like your quote about hell, right? It sounds like hell to me. It would be terrible to be stuck there.
Only for 8 hours though.
Yeah, but then you go in the elevator and to you it's instant. You come back out, right? You don't even know that you've been gone.
Yeah. I mean,
you don't even sleep.
Right. No, I think it is a very, thoughtful hypothetical. And I have talked to some of my friends who say there are a lot of uncanny resemblance to what actually goes on. Like if you think about, like, what is the purpose of a technology like that? If you think from a very capitalist perspective, it is very likely if you can completely sever those two personalities, what goes on in the office and what goes on outside the office, presumably your productivity will be higher at work. You don't necessarily get bogged down by what's going on in your life. Like we don't really necessarily talk about all the stuff that's going on in our life, when you go to work. But obviously there are a lot of things going on in the background, and that those things do, affect our productivity, do affect how we do work at work. So the technology that Lumen industry talks about, or basically came up with, is perhaps, some sort of capitalist dream, right? So people have been talking about why is productivity so sluggish? Why is it not going up for the last, I guess, 30, 40 years? It's despite the, emergence of internet and email and all sorts of this, cool innovations that's kind of come around for over the last 40, 50 years. And I guess we need something like Lumen Industries technology.
So you're making a pitch for it, right? You're going to invest in the seed round.
Oh, probably not seed round, but yeah, probably when they're, yeah, I can see myself buying a stock of Lumen. I'm pretty sure that, that technology would be very, very valuable. But yeah, one of the things that I kind of thought about, like what exactly those people are doing, right? It is not clear, even after season 1. They talk about some this weird stuff, some just numbers that appears, and apparently the numbers are, once you see it, you'll feel sometimes scared just by looking at the number. Sometimes if you have different emotions. It's not quite clear what exactly they are doing and what is it. Even they don't even know. It's pretty clear. They don't know why are they doing what they are doing, right? Again, a lot of probably uncanny resemblance. If you are working at a very big company, your particular role almost has no bearing, right? I'll mention something that kind of reminded me when I was kind of watching what exactly they're doing. Like we know what exactly they're doing, like in a literal sense, but we don't know why, right?
The purpose.
Right. We know the what, but we don't know the why. We have big tech companies, right? We have thousands of people working in these big tech companies, and it is possible a lot of people working in those companies may have no direct connection to the end result. That's for example, someone like us, like someone like investors care about. Even many investors want to can many of the projects that these big tech companies are working on. Right? They're saying these are actually value destructive. Right? It's kind of interesting because at times it confuses me what is valuable. Right? So I'll mention a quote. I kind of looked it up because this is, I obviously I didn't know exactly the quote by heart. But I remember I listened to something like this in a podcast. So I think this was one of the episodes that Invest Like the Best. The guest was Sridhar Ramaswamy. He used to work at Google. He used to run Google Ads business. And now he started his own company, also focused on search. So he's kind of now a competitor for Google. I think his company's name is Niva.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've tried the product, yeah.
Oh, I see. There's a particular bit that he mentioned that kind of stood out to me in that episode. I'm just going to quote him now. The fact of the matter is that in today's world, pretty much anyone who can afford a smartphone has a smartphone with an internet connection. And as I said, it's very hard to persuade them to search more. But if you still want to grow clicks, what's left? This is where we begin to work our way towards a magical 1 pixel line. Because it turns out the only reliable way in which you can grow clicks is to take up ever so slightly more space, is to change things like what is the color of the ads badge or what is a layout change. And there is an incredibly motivated and smart team of several hundred engineers and product managers that basically kind of do this for a living. And it turns out that it's absurd how much money one can make with changes like sometimes changing the shade of the badge. Not by any brilliant artistic imagination, but by literally running a grid of thousands of colors and saying which is the one that's going to have the most return. They can make like $1 billion more. It's kind of insane how much is riding on things like this. End quote. So again, if you if you mention to anyone like in 1950 that you can make $1 billion more just by changing the shades of your blue color, that would sound insane, right? What are you talking about? You make $1 billion more just by changing the shade of the color. And obviously, like people who are doing this, they're probably pretty smart. People who work at Google probably are, used to be a very good student, very meritorious. They did probably exceedingly well most of their adult life, most of their in student life. Right now, they're basically, some of them at least, are doing this sort of thing. Now, in one sense, this is not really a good use of their talent, just by changing the shade of the color. In another sense, who gets to decide what is valuable? Like, how do you decide what is valuable? The fact of the matter is, by changing the shade of the color, they are making $1 billion more.
Yeah.
Right. So it can be a bit presumptuous for someone like me to come in and say, you're not using your talent to good use. But then again, I don't necessarily think there are really black and white answers. Like someone can work on truly revolutionary things. Like, think about Claude Shannon that you recently talked about. He didn't monetize necessarily all the things that he invented, right? Does that make his inventions or ideas or thoughts less valuable just because we can't put a dollar amount to it, right? It kind of is confusing. I suspect, I don't know, obviously, I think possibly in season 2 they'll talk about it, that this weird stuff that they're doing, maybe it's there are two possible theories in my mind. One is basically kind of Google search, these shades of colors, they're probably doing something that's like that. They're probably changing just an incremental things, but it has, they are celebrating when they kind of met this quota after the quarter.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some relationship with reality, like what's going on in terms of numbers. Obviously, it's still a company, so maybe it has share and they care about stock price. So once they meet the quota, maybe it translates to some sort of dollar in an amount or dollar value. That's my one theory. The other theory is basically, they're just doing completely made up work. It's, they are the projects, right? So Lumen is trying to make this technology work. Like, how exactly are they going to make it work? They need voluntary people who would be willing to kind of go through that exercise, and they have to give them something to work. And so they get this computer and stuff, and so that they can just click all this stupid stuff all day long.
So many interesting ideas in there. I'm going to try to touch on a few. One of them about Google is I think it highlights the difference between value creation and value capture. Mm-hmm. And so Google is already creating a ton of value for the world, right? Helping people find stuff and information. And so the people changing the pixels and making the ads different are just increasing the capture of that value, right? They're not creating necessarily new value for the world. That's a different discussion, but I wrote something about Google a while ago that to me was like a big important thing. And I've never gotten any feedback on it because I think people don't want to touch this. But my question was, is it ethical for Google to have ads that most people don't realize are ads, right? You and I, when we look at a result page, we know what the ads are, we can see the little badges. But I don't think if you went on the street and showed people screenshots of things, most people they search for Toyota and they click the first result at the top, that's Toyota, and they don't realize it's an ad, right? And so the first real result may be the Toyota website, but the company is paying for the first ad at the top. They're paying for something that people would get anyway for free. If the ads were a totally different color with a different background, super separate, people would get used at their ads and scroll down and go to the real results more often. But right now, they all look so similar that I think people are clicking on ads without realizing it, thinking that they're organic search results. So there's an ethical thing about that, right? That I think more people should think about. But that's a separate discussion. Back to Severance. You just blew my mind at the end because it just made me realize about how often there are psychological studies where they tell the subjects to do something, but the study is not about that thing at all. It's about something else, right? Sometimes it's about just watching the subjects, how they react to stuff. So maybe it's all pointless make work, and the real test is about the severance procedure, how people react to it, how people react to being stuck in that environment all day long. Or it could be something like that, right? It could be like rats in a cage and they're just being watched and they gave them something to do. Mm-hmm. Another theory I had that's in a totally opposite direction is that what we're seeing on screen is it's the perception of the people in the room, right? And they could be unreliable narrators. So what we're seeing could be something different from what's really happening. So to them, they can't even see what they're really doing. So they're seeing these numbers that are pointless, but maybe they're doing some actual work on actual data that Lumen doesn't want them to even know, right? So there's no way they can get it out, even though they're severed. So the chip in their heads could be doing a lot more than what we think. We think it's just about like splitting their memories between like some locations right inside the office and outside. But and we've had some hints of that, right? With the test lab in the basement and all that kind of stuff. And then Mrs. Casey, she's severed, but she seems to be only conscious in the building. She doesn't have a life outside, right? She talks about how she has only like, I don't know, 16 hours of consciousness or something like that, right? So maybe the chip can do a bunch of stuff that we're not aware of yet. And so what we're seeing on screen is actually not even reality. It's the reality as perceived by the people with the chip that's messing with reality.
Yeah. Two things I want to mention on the Google and Severance aspect. So first, I think I should make it a bit more clear what exactly I was saying between like, the search, the shades of colors and like, advertising result. Like imagine, like obviously people who are working on those roles, they have a pretty clear idea why they're doing it. They know this thing actually, they can see it leads to more clicks, it leads to more advertising dollars. So they have a pretty good idea what's going on. They're definitely not severed, right? But in Severance, like imagine if these Google employees actually didn't know.
Right, they're just changing colors all day long and they get some feedback, right? Congratulations.
Yeah, right. Like, why am I changing these colors? They're just randomly changing the colors. And sometimes someone is telling you just met the quota for this quarter. And they don't even know what's going on. They just, okay, great. Like, I guess I'm supposed to celebrate, right? I'm supposed to go to a waffle party, right?
Or a melon party.
So I think that's what I'm kind of, I was getting at. Like, if these Google employees had zero clue what exactly is going on, they just know they're supposed to change the colors. And the computer basically tells them, oh, they're doing well or whatever, right? It's like something, some sort of like, validation that computer will tell them. If that were the case, and these are like, if they were like all severed employees of Google, let's say, then yes, then I think we could make a closer comparison. Obviously, that's not the case. So this comparison obviously falls short. The other thing is I can't get away with a question about ethics about my top position in my portfolio, right?
I kicked the hornet's nest.
Personally, I don't think it is Google's responsibility. If you think about any advertising, like let's Nike, they're basically selling shoes, but obviously they don't talk about just selling shoes on any of their ads. They talk about how anyone can be great, anyone can run and all that. Those are great messages. That's fine, but nobody tells you, hey, you can't actually run this fast if you are, I don't know, like if your BMI is like 35. Right? Or 40, right? I think this is not any company's responsibility. Like, I think we need to have a baseline expectation for society in general. Like if you start giving disclaimers and caveats, like you'll not talk about all the important stuff. You'll just keep talking about all these caveats and disclaimers. So I think Google does show like, ads, it's written there. Who am I to say that they need to also change the different colors? Like that's their decision. Like they will do what's best for them, not necessarily what makes me or someone else feel more comfortable.
Sure, but I think it's still an ethical question. To me, the way I see it is like a publisher that also has ads. And it's like you're reading the Wall Street Journal and you read an article and you don't know it was an ad, right? If there's no difference, like visually,
They mention it's an ad, right?
Oh, no, I know. But over time, like the difference is more and more subtle. And I think most people don't know that difference, right? There's a small like ad badge that's like 2 gray letters on one side. And like, that's pretty much it. So I'm just saying that on paper, they write that there's an ad, but in practice, de facto, most users of the service click on a lot of stuff and they don't know they're clicking on ads. And so to me, there's a question there. I'm not saying it's 100% wrong or 100% right, but it's in a gray zone. And to me, it's closer to like a newspaper where you can't differentiate between the content and the ads too easily. If you really look for it, you can. But most people, like, they don't realize they're reading ads, right?
My personal opinion is, like, I get your argument, and this is not an unfair argument, but I personally think this particular point is perhaps much more egregious for Amazon than Google. Like, I myself struggle. Like, if I search something on Amazon and you tell me, What is the organic result here? I couldn't probably tell you. It's just so many like sponsored ads or sponsored like result. It's very confusing even for me. I think it's for most people. Google, to me, it's actually much more clear. Again, but I understand your point. Most people may not realize this. And again, I'm also a shareholder of Amazon, so I'm not really bashing them too much here. It's just an opinion that I have. And I'm pretty sure they make a lot of money by doing that. Basically, I feel like everyone is forced to advertise. If you're a third-party seller on Amazon, you probably have to advertise if you wish to scale your business in any form or fashion.
I think it's a good comparison. I think it's a similar problem in both cases. And the main difference I have is that in a store, it's all products that you can buy. With information, sometimes I think there's kind of like a wider range of things that you're not expecting to be ads, right? To be commercial interactions. But I think both companies should be careful about, I don't know, making clear what's paid placement and what's something that the algorithm has determined is the best answer to your question. But back to Severance, because we could talk about, I'm sure, Google and Amazon.
Yeah, we keep going back to, the stocks, right?
Yeah, we can't help it. It's tangents. The tangents are good.
Yeah.
There's a show I've started watching. I've watched maybe like 6 seasons because of you. You convinced me. It's The Office.
It's my favorite.
I've never worked in an office, so I kind of like it's in the culture, right? I always knew what it was kind of like, but that show I think is very good at satirizing that world. And I feel like Severance is kind of like a bizarro office, right? It's kind of like The Office, but through a weird prism, because there's still the like infantilizing corporate BS, with all the rules and regulations, and people talk to you like your children. But there's also, like in Severance, there's so much menace below the surface, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is like, oh, everybody's so nice, like you can win this, but like be careful, because maybe they're not going to be so nice, right? If you don't follow the rules, they'll use the bad soap, or there's all these little references that are kind of like super creepy. And I don't know, I couldn't help but think of The Office, but through a Philip K. Dick kind of prism.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you mentioned about The Office and Severance comparison. I think there is. So I used to think like I came to America in 2017. Before, I think even I started watching Office, I think in 2017. So right after I came to US, I think I started watching Office. And my initial impression, so I also didn't have idea about, working at an office in the US. I have some idea, when I was in Bangladesh, I used to work at an office. So I have some idea about office, but not exactly how it is in the US.
Is it very different? I'm curious. In Bangladesh, is it very different, or is the corporate culture kind of like, has it been globalized by now?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of similarities. I think these are more of human conditions and cultural conditions, right? So yeah, there are a lot of similarities. But still, I think when I was watching Office, my initial impression is, yeah, this is like a satire. Obviously, this doesn't happen in real life. And over time, I'm increasingly more reserved on making that judgment. A lot of that is actually a lot of it actually does happen in real world, right? If you just observe what's going on with Elon Musk, or a lot of this other stuff that's kind of going on, or SBF. If someone basically made a movie and said it's fiction, I was like, yeah, they probably went overboard with the fictional character. This doesn't happen in real life. But now that we know that a lot of things that are coming out from some of these companies or from some of these characters, it does make me think the reality can be stranger than fiction. And I think the beauty of reality is because it's real, you can't really say, oh, this is impossible and this is BS. Anything that's fiction, you can always kind of put a value judgment on that, oh, this doesn't seem realistic. It seems to be oversimplification or some sort of too satirical depiction of what goes on in corporate life. But I don't know, the world is a strange place. It's we are 8 billions now. There are lots of permutation and combination that's going on, right? I feel and that's why I kind of mentioned that the initial quote, although that's about hell, you can omit the word hell and can talk about the world. There's so many of us. I think anything that you can think of, any sort of positive or negative, some of that is probably going on in some part of the world by some of the people, right? So So yeah, I'm pretty sure there are Michael Scotts out there in real world managing their company the way he does or he did. So yeah, and Severance, we'll see. Like, I always think about whenever I think about technology, the kind of comparison I think about is like if in 1980, if someone told my mother or father that you would be able to talk to your son who will be in the other side of the Atlantic, you can actually, see him, right? You can see him, and Mark Zuckerberg is trying to create a sense of presence. So maybe when the metaverse is available, my mother may start feeling like I'm actually sitting with her. If you kind of start explaining this, and again, most of it's gone almost free. Like obviously we pay for the internet, but we are having this call. We're not really paying by the minute, right?
Oh yeah, for the utility we're getting, it's basically free, right? The marginal cost of a gigabyte is very low.
Right. So if you kind of explained everything that's going on in today's world, someone who is in, let's say, Bangladesh in 1980, right? My parents would probably think you are completely out of your mind. You probably lost it, like, you're some crazy scientist. Basically, you just went complete crazy. So that's 40 years, right? So 40 years from now, all the stuff that's my kids or grandkids can tell me, it has, like, again, this is a very kind of Occam's razor principle, but that's how I kind of, like to think, like anything that they will tell me in 40 years should sound batshit crazy to me today, right?
Yeah,
so,
and maybe even there's a theory that the pace of change is accelerating, right? It's not linear because change is building on past change. So the next 40 years, may have as much change as the past 100 years, or I don't know. Right? Who knows what the logarithm is, but it could be even worse than we expect.
Exactly, right. So if it accelerates, my God, I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, like, what's the other Netflix series called? Black Mirror, right? Yeah. Like, the Black Mirror episodes and like Severance. Obviously, these are fiction, so reality will not match them to every minute detail, right? But some shades of these ideas potentially can be implemented. Like if you think about even some sort of medicine, like you take like a tablet or some sort of medicine, and you have like 5x your productivity for the next five hours. Like we know there are some stuff that's like people take some drugs to kind of do something like that. So yeah, these things can be more widely available with a lot less side effects, right? Who knows how productive people will be in 30, 40 years and how, spend their time at work and their personal life. So again, like, anything that's going to happen in 40 years, I feel like it should sound batshit crazy to me today. And I probably can't even verbalize it standing in 2022.
Yeah, maybe people will be really productive at having more meetings and more email and they'll spin their wheels faster. So I'm curious to have your thoughts on a few of the big plot points in Severance, because there's some like, I don't know, right? That's one thing I have to mention. I wrote about this, but I was expecting the finale to give us more answers. And now it feels like it's kind of like a cliffhanger in the middle of things, right? It feels like half of a series in some ways, which isn't bad if they deliver on the second season and it becomes the whole thing, right? But it's kind of frustrating in the meantime because I expected more answer and then it fades to black and then right?
That's how they, hook people like me. If there was season 2, I'm pretty sure I'd be watching it the next day, right? So
yeah, I expected like maybe not everything to be answered, but like 70% of answers, and then on second season you build on the remaining 30%, right? But right now it feels like we have maybe like, I don't know, 20% answers. So one of the things I'm not sure what they're going with it is like the whole time we think that Mark's wife is dead, and then we realize that Miss Casey, that the psychologist that they meet a few times for wellness checks, which are very Orwellian things, that she's Mark's wife. And so where are they going with that? And Miss Cobell, who pretends to be Miss Selvig on the outside, seems extremely interested in the relationship between the two, right? She watches on the monitor when they're together, and that seems to be part of the experiment, right? Like, can they, I don't know if they're trying to make them remember or they're trying to make sure that they don't remember, but they seem to be trying to trigger some emotional stuff. Like when Mark is in a wellness check with her near the end, and she asks him to sculpt his emotions or something, and he sculpts a little tree. And that's probably the tree that he went to see where we presume she had a car accident and she died, right? So is he remembering some stuff on an emotional level? And then she seems to be going back to the test floor, right? The kind of R&D lab in the basement or something. Do you have any theories about what's going on there, or is it a total mystery to you too?
It is more of a mystery to me than any answer that I can think of. One thing that I'm more or less certain is a lot of people are lying there. What's the name of that lady?
Cobell?
Cobell, yeah. Miss Cobell. Even the other guy, I think Milvich or
Milchick.
Milchick. Yeah, Milchick. I think they clearly know much more than these other four people in that office or in the macro refinement data,
Yeah, someone made a joke on Twitter that investors and financial people, well, we're all basically just doing macro data refinement.
But yeah, it's possible that some people know much more, and that's why it is perhaps likely that my second theory is more correct, that actually they're doing nothing. They are the product, right? So Lumen is a biotechnology firm, right? So they are trying to figure out technology or medicine or whatever to basically improve people's productivity, let's say. How do they do that? They have to kind of test it, right? So they need volunteers, and once they are in the office, they basically just give them made up work. But there are people within that building, like Miss Cobell, like our Milchick, who know a lot more than what's going on.
And that's the thing. If the data was that secret, wouldn't those people be severed too? Or because they seem to have access and they go back and forth with the outside. And so, I think it would support the theory that it's basically just BS.
Yeah. And to the point of the macro refinery data, right? Is that the name of the
macro data refinement, I think.
Right. Yeah. Macro data refinement. MDR. Yes, there are. My friend was mentioning that when I was kind of, talking about this Google analogy, and he was like, yeah, but how is it so different for compared to what we are doing? We're just talking about numbers, like what's the next months or next quarters or whatever, even 5 years down the line. And these are just kind of numbers that you're talking about.
And some numbers are scary. It's the same thing. Sometimes you see earning release and the numbers are scary.
Oh man, yes. Right.
We're just in MDR.
Right, yes, we are all part of the MDR team right now. So yeah, I mean, what I basically told my friend is, I am under no delusion that my particular role or my particular job has any outsized importance to whatever that's going on in the investing world or capitalism in general. I will not be missed if I stop doing what I'm doing today, right? Yes, I mean, I'm not saying that nobody will miss what I do, but I'm saying in the grand scheme of things, my absence will not be felt in any form or fashion.
I miss you.
But the way I kind of think about it is as a whole, our work has value and importance. It is very much possible. I also gave this disclaimer to my friend. Obviously, I'm part of this investment management industry, and you can have your own rationalization, this work is important, or this industry is important. So I can have my own biases. And so with that caveat out or disclaimer out there, I do think imagine if there is no active management, we talk about passive, and Buffett talks about how great passive is, and I generally agree. But if you take it to the extreme, that there is no active management, there will be no capitalism, right?
Yeah.
It will be even more random. It is already random, right? We're not a very good capital allocators as society, or especially in the short term. In the long term, hopefully, we are good enough as a market in general. But from time to time, market can be very, very bad at allocating capital, right? And if you have no active management, then I think that is the kind of death knell for capitalism. Someone needs to, or not someone, not a single person, but a group of people needs to think about how to allocate capital. And I do think that's why I mentioned anyone who is investing, even it's $10, $20, or 10 million or 20 billion, right? You are a capital allocator. You are allocating your capital to the potentially best use of that capital to someone who have better ideas in terms of how to use the capital. So if you think in that way, this industry is incredibly valuable, right? And again, like it has some sort of relevance to what I was saying about Google Ads. Like, if your job is basically just to change the shade of the color, like, yeah, that doesn't sound too exciting, right? That doesn't sound like, it's a good use of your own talent. But what it does is it gives Google billions of dollars, which they reinvest at, a lot of investors' chagrin, to Waymo, to in the Google Cloud, to all this, right? All this other stuff, right? So, and yes, like, a lot of those things are probably a lot more valuable work. Again, I'm using kind of a quotation when I say valuable, because it's not quite clear how you even define that. And I think over time, as the capital flows from, NZS Capital mentioned this, like a lot of this innovation that's going on are basically just a lot of R&D that's just going on is basically advertising funded, right? Yeah. And it kind of annoys me when people shit on advertising and how we everything needs to be subscription based. We need subscription in social media and all that, right? Yeah, but
scale.
We definitely underestimate the positive impacts advertising had, I guess, in a much broader sense. Like, when I was visiting, let's say, a restaurant, like, whenever I go to like any new place, I usually search on like lunch near me or dinner near me, and I'm not clicking any ad. I'm just looking at the ratings and just go to the probably top ratings. Any restaurant which has like top ratings, and I would probably never know that restaurant, or there is a low probability, not never, like there's probably low probability that I would find that restaurant. But what exactly they're paying to Google? They are basically getting a lot of value, like you were saying, value creation. So I do think a lot of these big tech companies created enormous value.
Oh, yeah.
And now, obviously, they are also trying to capture a lot of that value. Like, it's always that balance. It's always that tension. I do think in an individual sense, very few people have an obvious impact, or very few people's absence will be felt in almost most industries, right? Even if Buffett dies, it's not the end of the active management world, or like, it's almost, like, think about it. Buffett has been such a towering figure for the last, 5-6 decades. And even his absence will probably be forgotten, I don't know, maybe in 20 years after he's gone. And we will still read his work. We'll still read his shareholder letters probably for more than 2 decades. But there will not be any obvious absence in the active investment management industry in general. It's not like our society's ability to allocate capital will be significantly diminished just because Buffett is not there.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's part of what makes it robust.
Yeah, there may be some marginal impact, but it's so marginal it almost doesn't matter, right? I think the entrepreneurs, like, more visionary entrepreneurs may have more, may have more contribution, and their absence may be more felt. Would we be able to invent a reusable rocket? Yes, we would. We will, even if there was no Elon Musk. Even if there are no particular founder or entrepreneurs at any point of time, I think we would come to those inventions at some point.
Yeah, the timeline could be very different, right? The same thing with the iPhone. At some point, you have all of the pieces, you put them together, maybe not as well as Steve Jobs did, but probably not as early as he did. It's more about bending the curve than about like totally changing the world. Though that happens too. It's just probably rarer. Mm-hmm. Like some, big world events like World War II or whatever, like some of that kind of stuff, like that leaves traces in everything for decades and decades afterwards, right? So sometimes just one person making one different decision there could be very different. But the capitalist system, part of the strength of it is that, as you say, it doesn't depend on one person to keep running, because then when that person's gone, right? I think in France they have this dirigiste system, right? Which really about like the government decides, okay, we're going to invest in that industry, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, when the person changes at the top, that makes a huge difference, right? It's a lot less decentralized. So I don't even remember how we got to capital allocation. That's the beauty of these conversations.
Sure that's where we will end up, regardless of what's the topic at hand.
Yeah. So back to Miss Casey. One other question I had, I'm trying to understand what they do in the test lab in the basement, right? So we assume that she's only been conscious for a few hours because that's what she tells us. But what if she's awake when she's in there, but she's a different person and they do all kinds of other tests or other things in there with people that are conscious, but they're severed in a different direction, right? Instead of having someone at the surface and in the basement, they have someone in the basement and someone else in the sub-basement. So that could be interesting to find out in season 2. That's just a theory.
So Miss Casey is the one...
she's Mark's wife. Mark's supposedly the wife.
I think there are a lot of unanswered questions about Miss Casey because she's not alive as an outie, right? She's just an ini character. I think the power of the technology is perhaps much more profound than what has been told to us so far. The initial premise was it's just, two versions, ini and outie, of every single person, right? But now we have, as kind of the season progressed, we got to see there are a lot of different dimensions. So one is Miss Casey. The other question I had was, did Miss Casey go through the severance process without telling Mark? How did she end up here? Basically, the show tells us, as Mark was grieving, and he was just trying to kind of go for an escape for these 8 hours of the day, as it was too much for him to kind of grieve for his wife. So one possibility is that Miss Casey, without telling Mark, already went through the severance process and she was already a character, and then she died. So the ini lives on, but the outie has died. That could be one explanation. The other explanation could be they can just create characters, right?
Yeah, are they clones or can they change people's memories, right? So did they invent the car accident and it never happened? But then Mark's sisters knows about it, so they would have to fake it for everybody? Or is the company that all-powerful that they can bring in his whole family and implant some false memory in all of them? That's my next question, right? Miss Cobell, aka Miss Selvig, Mark's neighbor, the nice lady next door, right? Who's also his boss on the inside, who's kind of a hardcore badass, right? She throws a mug at him and she's really intense.
Yeah.
Why is she living next door to him and pretending to know him and keeping such close track on him, right? Because to me, that life seems fake on multiple levels. If she's a boss in there, why is she driving that old crappy car? And so it seems like it's almost like the company gave her an assignment, right? Okay, we're doing something very special with Mark. He's very important to us. Your mission is to keep an eye on him, even on the outside, right? That's your special mission. You're going to be compensated, but it's like being an undercover cop, right? You live the life, even when you punch out. But when you see Miss Cobell's house, she has a shrine to Keir in her house, right? She seems to be a true believer. So when you see her, she seems super cynical and you kind of think it's work to her. But then she seems kind of having religious fervor for the company too. And she's a very confusing character. And I don't know, she goes very far for the company, right? At the funeral, trying to get back the chip and that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to learning what's her deal.
Yeah, I think the mysterious thing is, at least to me, it feels like she's not even part of the top management.
Yeah.
She's not part of the board of directors. There seems to be probably a few more layers.
They fire her like it's nothing, right?
Right, exactly. So it's just so she doesn't even seem to be such a central character from Lumen Industries' perspective. So maybe it does seem like they haven't told us the extent of the power of this technology or what exactly they're trying to do, because there are a lot of loose ends here. So you have Miss Cobell, who has the same consciousness as ini and outie, right?
Yep.
So she knows what's going on in there. So it's obviously a very, very super top secret, right? Because the rest of the world knows these are completely different. You don't have consciousness, so it's kind of fine. These companies is trying to probably improve productivity and all that. It's a new technology, right? So the rest of the world is clearly not aware of it. So it's super secretive, but it's held by people. The secret is held by people who also don't seem to be super important. So what if they go rogue, right? So if you fire, why was Lumen not afraid that, hey, if we fire Cobell, she can just tell this stuff to the rest of the world? So what is holding Miss Cobell back? And why would she not be? And she clearly cares about Lumen. She, like you were saying, she went back and she was still trying to help despite being fired, right? So yeah, I don't know. I feel like we don't know the extent of the power of the technology that the show talked about.
Maybe they assume she won't say anything because she knows how powerful Lumen is and how they have reach, right? They can find you even outside. I don't know. But we clearly see how, like, at the end, when you see where Helly wakes up and there's like this big press conference with all the photos that Milchick was taking. And it's like they really want to market this thing, right? To really sell it. And it's so glossy and like all the photos look so good. And it's like, it gives you a hint at how, like, in real life, how a good PR company can make your product really attractive. And like, there's all these videos of her talking about how great it is to be severed and how many things have we been sold that way. And it works.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like I said, because it's fiction, it's very hard to find exact resemblance.
Yeah.
But there are shades of resemblance for sure. Yeah, a lot of corporate speak almost has no bearing with reality, or like, it's just so much massaged in a way that you have to take it with a lot of grains of salt.
And humans are so mimetic that you put a very charismatic spokesperson for something, someone who's very likable and that people relate to, and they're going to take those feelings that they have for the person and they associate it with the products, right? That's why, like, Nike pays these athletes millions and millions of dollars because, well, lots of people love them and they're going to associate that love and that respect with the product, right? That's kind of like the same trick that Lumen seems to be pulling here. And also the fact that Elena Helly is the daughter of the CEO. It's like, well, if it's good enough for my daughter, right, it's good enough for anyone. But that's the public-facing part of it. But the public is not going to see that on the inside, she's trying to hang herself in the elevator and trying to get out, and she can't. She's trapped in purgatory forever, right? Well, not forever for her, but that's the other very scary aspect of it. That, like, it's so scary when you think about it. But all of the innies, if the Audi decides that they don't want to work there anymore, it's like the innie dies, right? They're never going to wake up again. When they have the retirement party for Bert, everybody's like, oh, congrats. But a few people realize that basically it's a funeral.
Right. So if you die in that office, you never come out of that office, right? Like, is that how that works? Is that your takeaway? Let's say if she tried to commit suicide, so if she died, let's say, I don't know whether you can even die. I don't know. But let's say if she could die, does that mean the Audi also dies?
Yeah, because they're sharing the same body. So if she was to cut her arm in the inside, well, tough luck for the Audi, right? That's why they have, like, Mark at some point has a bruise on his face. I think, is it when he got the mug in the face, or I don't remember, but and then when he's on the outside and he realizes, but they left him a note like, oh, you tripped and you fell or something like that, right? They make up a reason, but you can never really know what happened. Like, I even think they mentioned at one point that, like, someone got pregnant on the inside, and, like, what? Can you imagine that the trauma and the abuse that could take place when you don't remember anything?
No, so I guess my question is what's going on with Miss Haley, because she is the daughter of the founder. So does that mean even his daughter is not aware of the extent of the technology? Or
I think she doesn't know what it's like to live there, right? I think she knows the theory that it's like, oh, you're not even going to remember and it's fine and we treat you well and it's a nice office and, like, you can sell it, but to live it without being able to escape, without being able to have any life and any memory of the outside, it's like you're kind of born in there, it's all that you know, and it's kind of soul crushing, right? And so, but she probably thought that, well, I'm going to do it for a while, like a couple of weeks or something, it's a PR stunt, and then after that she's never coming back, right? Elena has a way out. She can just, after the publicity thing is done, she can just never go back. But the others don't really have a choice.
Okay, let me put this kind of thought experiment then. So let's say you know that if this technology takes off, you will be kind of the richest person in the world. Or like crazy amount of money. It doesn't have to be the richest person in the world. But let's say tens of billion, maybe $100 billion. If this technology takes off. And obviously, like, it's so hard to even think for the Audi that Ini is a real person, right? Because the Audi doesn't know. Audi has no idea what's going on in there. It's just imagination. And if I ask someone, like, hey, what's going on in there? Oh, they just go and sit there. That sounds like not a big deal. Like,
you do work in a nice office, right?
Right. So if the deal was you get to be one of the richest person in the world, $100 billion or whatever, and you just have to, let's just sign somewhere that you will let this kind of, imaginary character go through this experience. If that were the deal, I can imagine most people would take it. So even if she knew, I don't know what she knew, but I can see why she would be tempted. Like even if that person is suffering as she is or she was, the Audi has no idea. Audi is doing great as an Audi, right? She's becoming richer and richer. She's getting more fame. Everyone is following her. She has the life she dreams about. So would she stop that for this abstract idea of suffering that this fake character is going through, like who is not even like a real person, right?
Yeah, no, in Elena's case, right, her whole life with her family is Lumen and all that, so she has a huge incentive to go through with it, even if she gets some signals that the innie is in distress, right? Because with the suicide attempt and all, it's hard not to get the message there. For the other characters, I don't know, it feels harder to me because the only thing we have is time, right? And so to give away like half of your life that you can't remember and you can't live, it feels like a big sacrifice, even if you're getting a paycheck, even if the innie wasn't suffering, even if it was just boring work.
Okay, let me put this another thought experiment then. What do you think? How many people would take this opportunity that if you go through this experience, go through this like severance experiment, and you become, let's say, this company promises you'll be 50% more productive, right? And you get more promotions, you get more money, and you just don't know what's going on in there. Do you think a minority of the people will take that opportunity?
I think it depends on the people, right? Because I like what I do, so I would want to know about it. But some people have terrible jobs, terrible work, or...
I think it's fair to say most people don't enjoy what they do. I'm thinking from global perspective.
Yeah.
Like truly global. Like someone who is in Bangladesh and basically just pulling rickshaw every day, it's not the most fun job that you can imagine. That's probably the most of the people in the world. When you think about work, it's not like just white collar people working at this super fun.
For Michael Scott.
Right. So it can be a lot of menial jobs, a lot of people who are not really, it's not fun, right? Even for I don't know, like when I think about going through Blind, like a sort of anonymous online forum where people just talk about their workplace, the emphasis on total compensation, what they call TC, is just mind-boggling. People care deeply about their TC. It is clear to me that a lot of people's identity is associated with what is your TC is in your company, right? Now think about it, this technology allows you to be much more productive. So you'll probably get more promotion. You'll get more TC, right?
Yeah.
You don't remember. And maybe a lot of people don't have very fun family. They almost, many of them probably try to hide from their family, right? So I think it's not a 1% thing. It could be minority, but it's probably not low single digit. It could be some double digit number would be willing to go through that experiment.
Yeah, and I think the percentage of people who would agree to it is not fixed, right? So depending how you sell it, if you have glossy videos showing severed people being super happy and you're going to be one of them and you raise the compensation and at some point a lot of people have a price, right? It's like, well, for 80K, I'm not going to give up like 7 hours a day or 8 hours a day, but for 150, for 200K, for at some point, a lot of people would do it just for the money, right?
There is another reason a lot of people may be incentivized. I think about it, like let's say you work at some of these big tech companies and only 2% of the people opted in to go through this severance experiment. My guess is if these people are, if the baseline is that they are actually, generally speaking, they're good employees and they become supercharged in terms of productivity, in terms of their utilization of time. What if next year, let's say Google is giving, let's say they have a rating system. I know they have a rating system. I don't know exactly the terminologies. Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the top rating. Let's say the number of people who got 5 next year, majority of them went through severance experiment. So that creates the message to the ones who didn't go through it. Once you go through the severance experiment, you become so much more productive. You make so much more money. You have so much more TC, right? So, and at some point, obviously, if everyone has gone through that severance experiment, there is no benefit. There is no relative advantage and everybody is more, so the company benefits, the company who invented that thing, they are the ones who benefit. Ultimately, it just all evens out. Nothing really changes in terms of the relative standing. But in the beginning stage, I think there will be significant pressure if that's how it pans out. Like people who go through the Severance experiment, they all end up becoming the top performers, and they get more promotions. They become the top management. Let's say all the top Silicon Valley CEOs went through Severance experiment. What's the message that you're getting?
Yeah, and it gets normalized too, right? Because when something's new, it's weird, like nobody wants to do it, but you see it for long enough, it becomes normal. I remember when AirPods came out and people felt they looked weird, right? You have these little white sticks in your ear, and it's you felt self-conscious wearing those in public. But now it's like super normal, right? And that's a small example, but I feel like at first everybody would think Severance is super weird, but then like a few years later, you keep seeing severed people on TV and they look fine, and right? Yeah, that's a good thought experiment.
You look fine, happy, rich, and every positive traits that you can think of. Like you think about Miss Haley, like everybody's interviewing her, like she has this big audience, like everything's great. Like, once you kind of experience that, once you kind of, watch that, you may feel tempted. And in the initial years, people will be, and that's why maybe Miss Haley is doing it. She knows that the Audi will be fine. The Audi already has a great life, right? She just needs to show people that it's okay. It's normal. It's not this weird little thing that you don't want to, and that's the thing, like, once it's like base level, like you are expected to go through Severance experiment, then the company makes a buttload of money, right?
One aspect that we see in the series is when they show us that there is a procedure to wake up, basically when they're outside, wake up the innie, right? So you get, I think it's Milchick waking up Dylan in his closet to ask him some questions, but he's outside of the office. I thought that was a great reminder in the series that all the people that we see on screen that we haven't seen outside of the office, well, they still have a life outside, right? Because we see it for Mark, but we tend to forget that Irving and Dylan, they also have a life outside, right? But then he meets his kid, which wasn't supposed to happen. Well, the innie after that, how do you stop thinking about that, right? So if we keep the thought experiment alive, and this could be possible in the real world, how do you keep the innies and the outies segregated, right? At some point, like the people at Google, maybe they find out, well, I have a family, I have a wife, I have kids. How do you stop thinking about that? And would that kind of like break the severance at some point, right? Break the, like, I'm not okay anymore with not knowing what's outside out there, right? I want a real life too. I don't want to just work all day and all night to benefit someone else who's me in theory, but who's not me subjectively, right? They're kind of like slaves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think, we all know no technology can be 100% perfect, right? So there will be bugs, and those bugs will lead to recollection of those memories that you have a family, you have a kid, right? I can imagine all sorts of ways that people may find it repulsive. Like, for example, you are at work, so you have no idea what's going on in the outer world, but your kid has an accident outside, and you don't know. You can't know, right? Yeah, so obviously these things will happen if I continue to kind of, run this thought experiment. So in that case, people will be, no, I want to know what's going on. I don't want to be oblivious to what's going on with my family, right? So, but again, I think it's kind of the flywheel thing, right? So like I said, if it starts going on, if it becomes more normal, who knows? Like, I feel like we are, like you said, we are very mimetic, right? So like that would be a significant social pressure. Like 10% people doing it, and the people who are doing it are doing great. Again, optically at least, right? They are getting all the promotions. They have all the money. The Audis are having fun. So like they get to think about it. Like if you go to San Francisco and all the beach houses, like any area, like imagine all the beach houses are bought by people who have gone through this Severance experience, and that would create such a significant social pressure. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I can't just remain this human. I need to go through this, this experiment to make sure I'm providing for my family. I'm buying this next beach house, right? And that's the thing. Like, I was just reading, like, this funny. Well, to me at least, it's funny. And Reddit post, like I think he works at a FANG, and he mentioned like, Who are these people who are buying this 10 million plus, dollar house?
I saw that, and he was kind of like, "How am I supposed to afford this $10 million house? I'm in my 30s and I only have 2.5 million."
Yeah, I can guarantee you that whoever that person is, he's willing to go through the severance.
Oh, for sure. Someone who has an other scorecard like that, right? And he's only valuing himself in relations to others around him is definitely gonna go severed if severance seems like the thing to do to climb the ladder. But then the other question, if we keep the thought experiment, right? Because it's just a thought experiment. I'm not saying you're going to invest in Lumen Industries tomorrow, right? But I'm not sure if being severed would help you with work in the types of works that create the most value, right? Like if you're looking at numbers on a screen, it doesn't matter. But if you have to be creative, don't you need like all of your life experiences outside and to have input to generate that creativity? Even if you're a coder or something, you still need some amount of creativity to do that. And if you're kind of like a blank slate and you wake up on a table and like you don't know anything about anything, I think that would kind of stunt your ability to be creative and think outside the box. But I don't know. That's another thought experiment.
No, it is. I think then we'll have a much clearer answer to this pesky question about nature versus nurture. Right. Yeah, that would be a good way to do all kinds of psychology experiments. Right. If it's all nature, let's say if it's 100% nature, then that shouldn't be a problem. You're just creative person. Genetically, you're just creative person, and you will still be just as creative. But if nurture has a significant role, then yes, then the severance thing would probably kill your productivity to a significant extent. I don't know, like what's the consensus. I think that my guess is the consensus is some sort of a mix of nature and nurture, right? But we don't really know to what extent.
What I've seen is that the genetic component is higher than most people think. The best studies for that are twin studies, like identical twins, who are basically genetic clones, but that have been raised separately, right? They were separated at birth or given in adoption or something. And so they were raised in very, very different environments. And so you can kind of judge like what's the genetics and what's the environmental factors. And I know that Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, covers that a lot. And it seems that a lot of the time, like the genes are very, very strong. People end up more similar than you would expect. But there's still always like environmental nurture aspect to it.
Yeah, I read that book, and there are a lot of uncomfortable stuff in there.
Yeah.
But that's what I was saying. Like, if we would have much more definitive answer, if some sort of technology like this were available, then if you would still be just as creative, that would probably lead to the conclusion that it's probably all nature and very little.
Well, though at the same time, like the creativity could come from the genes largely. But the genes that built your brain would still need the input of all kinds of life experiences, right? So being always in the same office, in the same room with the same people may not be enough input in the short term. Not the nurture kind of like how my parents raised me when I was 5, but the nurture of like the moment. If your brain is only seeing the same room all the time, your creativity probably drops after a while.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a kind of not rapid fire, but just go over a few of the points before we end. Other things that stood out to me, like the concept of the board, who's always like speaking through like someone else, right, with a little earpiece. And I thought that was really cool, really creepy. And I feel like there's a big reveal in there. The fact that we're not seeing or hearing the board. Who's on the board, right? Is it people we know? Is Mark on the board? Like, who knows, right? I don't think it works right with what we've seen, but there's something going on with the board. I don't know if you have the same feeling I do, but it feels like there's something there.
Yeah, that old guy, like the founder, I guess, of Lumen, he's on the board, right?
The guy that we see at the end, I think is James Keir or Egan. I think he's the current CEO. He's the father of Haley, and he's the descendant of the original founder. So it's kind of like a family dynasty, right? So I guess he's on the board, but who else? That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely creepy. And the board is generally, it's not supposed to be just one person. So there has to be multiple people in there. If Miss Cobell was not fired, I would probably imagine she may be also she may be CEO and she may be part of the board. Sounds like there are more layers between Miss Cobell and the board. And like this one lady, I think she comes to the office once in a while as some sort of mediator between the board.
Yeah, I think it's Natalie. And that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
You never hear the board directly. And so Natalie could be pretending to be speaking with the board, but she's running some stuff. And Cobell at some point says that, right? Is it just you? And then someone on the speakerphone says, whatever, we're here. Or that someone speaks and then they say, okay, no, the board's really there. But maybe sometimes the board isn't there and Natalie is just running things. Or I don't know. That's another question, right?
Yeah. No, lots of unanswered questions. And they have high expectation to match in season 2. Hopefully it will be there.
Yeah, the next thing is all of the parties, right? What did you think of the dance party, the melon party, the waffle party? Was the weirdest one, right? It's kind of like a ritualistic, like almost satanic, like weird animalistic thing with the mask and the weird dance. And that was so weird to see, like everybody's so like buttoned up all the time. Like Milchick is always like trying to be professional. And then there's the dance party where he's like dancing around with the flashing red lights. And I love how visually and like they create all these dynamics where it's like, there's a huge contrast between those weird parties and boring ass everyday life.
Here's the funny thing. After watching the waffle party, I thought to myself, did I ever have waffle in my life?
Oh man, you need next time you're here. We're gonna make you waffles.
So on the very next day, I actually did have waffle. My wife was telling me you did, like probably once, right?
Do you like it?
I'm not sure whether I actually had it, but yeah, now I know for sure I did have waffle in my life. But yeah, it's also very strange and weird, and it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. Like, it's just some weird people are dancing and you just have a waffle, right?
It's weird for a corporate setting. That's the thing. And the thing is, it's not Dylan's first waffle party, right? He seems to know what it is.
Okay, yeah.
But that's the thing. If someone is only always on the inside, you can kind of brainwash them however you want, right? And so to them, weird things can be kind of, oh, that's just the way things are here, right? Like another thing that this series remind me of is there's a computer game called BioShock, and there's 2 of them. And it's always set in a world where it's like, oh, some crazy rich billionaire built up like a underwater kind of city based on all of his like ideology and ideas, or in the sky, right? In the second game. The whole Severance thing, like the perpetuity wing with all of the statues and all of the paintings of the story of the family, this whole like kind of like it's like a cult. That kind of aspect of it to the people on the inside can seem kind of normal because they've never known anything else, right? It's a way to brainwash them.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think just think about what you went through in the last 12, 18 months. Like thousands of people have decided a rock is worth $500,000 and we just nodded along. Yes, that's $500,000, right?
Yeah, a JPEG of a rock.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I was more shocked by the rock than JPEG. When I watched the JPEG thing, I was like, okay, I probably don't understand this, what's going on. Maybe it's just a community thing or whatever they were talking about. But the rock was like, what is going on? Like,
yeah.
There's not even a pretense of community or all that stuff. It's just, I don't know, it's nothing, right? And people are telling me that's $500,000 or whatever we're selling for. Like I said, I always maintain that the reality is almost always stranger than fiction. I think our imagination is limited compared to what reality can offer. And once something happens in reality, then we can probably expand our imagination and tinker with it. It would not surprise me at all. Like, I don't think it would take much to convince us something is worth fighting for or spending our life for, right? For something that many people may find silly later. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of that is going on even today. My wife thinks my job is kind of funny, like, so...
Yeah, mine does too.
Right, exactly. So that we don't even have to go to a different time. We can just look at each other. And I'm pretty sure a lot of us find others' work kind of funny, kind of, irrelevant or not super valuable or whatever. So yeah, but the people who are doing what they're doing, they're probably doing it with a lot more commitment and a lot more sincerity and seriousness. And they probably think this is much more important and valuable.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. I'm going to end with a couple of trivia things that I found about the series, little things that people have noticed. On the computer terminals at the macro data refinement office, there's no escape key on the keyboards. I thought that was a nice touch.
Interesting.
And when Ellie, she finishes her work and then they've reached their targets for the quarter. So her computer shows like a little animation, like old school, like 90s computer graphics animation of like the founder here, like flying on an eagle or something. It's ridiculous. But the voiceover there is done by Ben Stiller, the producer of the series. Well, that's kind of cool. And the last one is the building, the amazing Lumen building. Every time I see it from the sky, I'm like, wow, that must be CGI. That looks too good, right? That's amazing. And then I was mentioning that on Twitter, and someone replied on my thread that his father worked there. He recognized it. It's the old Bell Labs building. And so I looked it up.
Wow.
And it is the Bell Labs building in Holmdel in New Jersey. And so the connection with recent podcast is Claude Shannon worked at Bell Labs. I assume it was in that building. Maybe it was somewhere else, but there's the Shannon connection right there.
It's all connected.
Oh, and the big water tower in front of the building, it looks like a transistor because the transistor was invented there. It may not be a water tower. It may be a sculpture of a transistor. I don't know, but that's another little trivia thing.
Interesting. Great. No, I really enjoyed. Thanks for recommending. Definitely convinced me to give it a second shot. And I'm glad I did.
Thank you for joining me. It's always fun to share things we like with others. It's a way to appreciate them more, I find. And the best films and series are the ones that you can talk about afterwards and you can relive them in your mind and turn them around in all directions and find new things about them. So Severance definitely was one of them. I hope that they keep the quality as high for season 2.
Hopefully. Yep.
All right. Have a good day, my friend. Bye-bye.